and it is a very personal account of his family and of that era. Mr. Modis lives in Lugano, Switzerland, and he came especially to London for this presentation. If you have mobile phones, maybe you should switch them off, please. And let's welcome Mr. Modis.
Thank you, Ms. Calesteras, for this nice welcome. And it's my pleasure to talk to you, to present to you my book tonight. As Ms. Calesteras said, I've written books, but this is the only one that has nothing to do with what I studied. In fact, I'm not even a literary person, but it still is, I think, a book that I hold closer to my heart. But let me tell you a few words about why I wrote this book. Ever since I was young, my mother kept telling me stories about Constantinople. And I say Constantinople because that's what it was called at the time. The Istanbul came much later. And you all know Istanbul is a Greek word from Istanbul. So she was telling me so many stories. At the end, I started recording her. And I have about 20 hours of recordings, her telling me stories. And up to the age of 8 or 7 or 8, I thought Constantinople was a Greek town until my mother left and the Turks came and took over. After Theodore is my mother's name, after she died, we unearthed many documents, letters, photographs, manuscripts of my father, and all this material was very rich in information. In fact, the material that we unearthed from my father, who was a lawyer and very prolific, his name was Yorgos, was enough to put together a little book like this on the topic of Macedonia, which was a hot topic at the time and continues to be. This is in Greek. In fact, most of it is Katharebusa, the language they spoke at the time, the literary people that's what they were writing at. And also, this provided extra material for the book that I'm talking today. And of course, there was a passionate and intricate love story between Theodosia and Yorgos that was full of passion and difficulties because Yorgos' mother objected very vehemently. Many significant historical events took place during the first half of the 20th century. I'm not talking only about the two world wars, that are well known. I'm talking about the ones that are lesser known, like the Balkan Wars or the Macedonian struggle, Makedonikosa Agonas, which are not very well known anyway, not outside Greece. And even the Greek Civil War that took place towards the middle of the century, even that is not well known. Not to mention the fact that in America, even the invasion of Cyprus and the dispute of the name of Macedonia are not very well known. Among the Greeks, maybe more, but not. That's why I decided to write it in English, because every time the story is impacted by a historical event, I take the opportunity to explain in a little insert, which I put in high gray, light gray background, so the person who's interested only in the plot can skip it, but at least it will serve to inform English-speaking people about this historical event. At the end, I realized I had enough material to make a novel, which is not a novel, it's a biography, but it reads like a novel. And when this movie director, you may not have heard of him because he's made mostly documentaries, not big features. He read the manuscript and he told me this could very well become an amazing television series as well as a movie. But then he added, it's going to be an expensive one. So if you're going to pursue that line, you better go in America and try to find some rich Greek entrepreneurs who will finance it. The book is dedicated to the memory of 4 people of the Modis family: Theodosia, my mother, and Yorgos, my father, and then Paraskevi and Theodoros, who are the parents of Yorgos. Now, I will not tell you the whole lot about the plot of the book because, as I say, it reads like a novel, and I don't want to spoil it for those who may want to read it. But I will concentrate on these characters, describe them a little bit because they're all fascinating, and also on the historical events that took place, and I will show you some pictures. I'll start with Theodosia, who begins in Constantinople, and she's the oldest of 4 children who lost both their parents, and here she is at the age of 13, she was born on 8, at the age of 13 in the middle, with a long braid on which she always liked to put a big bow tie. She was caught up on the exchange of populations of the 1923, and under very strenuous conditions, very crowded boats. These are the actual boats that carried those refugees. You see how the situation is unpleasant. This was the world's greatest ethnic cleansing ever, because 2 million people were displaced. 1.5 million Greeks came over from Asia Minor, and 500,000 Turks left Greece to go to Asia. So the 2 girls, respectively, only 2 girls of the 4 children are left on the boat all alone, Theodosia 15 and her sister 11, and they land in Thessaloniki, outside Thessaloniki, in Kalamagya. This is an actual photograph of the refugee camp in Kalamagya at the time. The well-dressed gentleman on the front had nothing to do with the refugees there. The 2 girls were given a small tent. The bigger tents were reserved for families. And this was also a quarantine camp, because nobody was supposed to go out for 40 days for not spreading diseases. And in fact, Theodosia saw her long braid cut off and trashed to prevent the spreading of lice. But she was much more concerned about another matter, because her grandfather had trusted her with a number of golden coins. They were strapped around her waist underneath of her clothes, and she had to go through obligatory disinfectant showers. So there are many stories like this, complications, but eventually she sneaks out of the refugee camp. She walks all the way to Saloniki. She finds the Teachers College Academy, and she becomes a teacher. And 3 years later, she's appointed as a teacher in Florida, a little town close to the was Yugoslavia then, today is North Macedonia. Florida, at the age of 18, she's appointed as a teacher there. And she just showed up there, but there she met Yorgos Modis from Monastiri. Yorgos was, Monastiri is very close to Florida. In fact, Monastiri at the time was a much more important cultural and business center, commercial center, Greek center than Thessaloniki. Thessaloniki, in 1900, was perhaps 3 times as big as Monastiri, but it was mostly Jewish. Thessaloniki was practically 60% Jewish, while Monastiri was 70% Greek. So at the end, there were more Greeks living in Monastiri than in Thessaloniki. Here is Yorgos Modis, having just received his lawyer's degree at the age of 24, and he comes from a tragic and historic Macedonian family. His parents, here they are, Paraskevi and Theodoros. Paraskevi is the other strong woman in the book. Theodoros were well-to-do, and they lived richly in Monastiri. They had their quarrels. In fact, rumors have it that she even had him at gunpoint sometime. But what they shared in common very intensely was their love of anything Greek. So it's known that the Greeks outside Greece are more patriotic than those who live in Greece. Well, that was particularly true of Paraskevi and Theodoros. Because the family is tragic, because Theodoros is assassinated in 1904 by Bulgarian Komitadzis. Here is a picture of his funeral. Thousands of people attended it, and this is the main street of Monastiri called Farvi, because it's a bigger street. And that signaled the beginning of the Macedonian struggle. They killed him because he was leading the executive branch of the Greek Avengers, the Greek Defense Committee that was protecting Greeks against Bulgarian actions to try to claim affiliation from the local people as Bulgarian. Theodore was saying, no, we are Greeks, we're not Bulgarian. So after his death, a song, a folkloric song was spontaneously created, and it mentions his name. In fact, it says, Milis monite ver παιδιά το θάνατο του Μόδη, του Παπαπέτρου, το σφαγμό, του άτιμου το πόλη, and other things. The song plays a role in the book, that's why I'm mentioning it. In fact, Paraskevi used to know how to sing it. Theodore Modis was the first Macedonian assassinated, Macedonomachus, and a month later, Pavlos Melas, a better known Macedonian fighter, was killed in a Turkish ambush. And this marked, the two deaths marked the beginning of the Macedonian struggle. Now, the wife of Pavlos Melas was Natalia Dragouni, and she became a friend of Paraskevis just because, if nothing else, just because they both shared the unjust loss of their husbands. In fact, I have a letter of Paraskevi to Natalia in which Paraskevi congratulates Natalia because her son got into the fight, is fighting now to take back his father's blood. Natalia Dragouni was the sister of Ion Dragounis. Now this is even more well-known Macedonian fighter. He was more than a fighter, he was a politician, literary person, he was a writer, a revolutionary. In fact, in this little book, my father has devoted a whole chapter to Ioannis Dragounis. He admired Ioannis Dragounis. And if I were to go to a little bit of gossip, Ioannis Dragounis had a love affair with Penelope Delta. Now, Penelope Delta, you may have heard of her patriotic teenage literature, like Statistika tu Valtu. I read these books. She wrote many books for teenagers, where she describes the fights, the adventures of the Macedonian fighters in the Macedonian War, and they're fascinating books. They're really fun to read. I recommend, if you have children or grandchildren, incite them to read them. I'm sure they can translate it into English too. And Penelope Delta, I must mention, when the Germans came, they occupied Greece and they raised the flag of the swastika in Acropolis, she committed suicide. So this is all these people constitute a big Macedonian family, and in particular, this is a photograph of the times where for Paraskevi and Theodoros, and after the assassination, Paraskevi took up the armed struggle. She opened her house to the Greek Avengers, she gave them money and support, and she was in a way fighting. That's why the caption here reads, ο Αγρίας δολοφονηθής εν μοναστηρίο από το Βουλγάρο καθαρεύς. The unjustly killed Theodoros Modis with την πατριωτικοτάτη σύζυγό του. Πατριωτικοτάτη means most patriotic wife. It says most patriotic because she became a fighter. Well, as a consequence, the Bulgarians targeted her house and burned it down. At the last minute, she threw out of the window everything she could salvage. She stashed everything up in a horse-drawn carriage, including her two young children, and headed south towards Liberty, Greece, the first town of which was Florina. That's how they ended up in Florina. That's how Yorgos ended up in Florina and met Theodosia. Indicative of the patriotic feelings of Paraskevi and Theodoros are those two little custom-made purses. These are purses that are made with tiny beads, colored beads that are used as a mosaic, and they commemorate big events, and they have puzzle-like mechanisms, like if you don't know how to open it, you cannot open it. But what they commemorate is more interesting. The person on the top, these are the two sides of it, has the initials P and Theodore, Paraskevi and Theodore is a couple, and they commemorate 1453, the fall of Constantinople. The other side is in more joyful colors and commemorates 1921, the beginning of the revolution against the Turks. The other purse has the initials Gamma Mi, Georgios Modis, and the was the father of Theodorus. That's why his son was called Theodorus. And he's the St. George killing the dragon, and commemorates 1908. Now, how about 1908? What happened in 1908 that's worth commemorating? I had to look it up myself. It's the deposing of the Sultan and the reinstallation of the constitution in the Ottoman Empire. Now, this event was hailed by the Greeks as a very significant event. Here is again the main street of Monastiri with thousands of people again. Greeks are demonstrating the flag on the right says Zito to Sindagma, long live the constitution. The flag on the left reads Eleftheria Δικαιοσύνη Sotis, liberty, justice, equality. The Greeks are celebrating as if they were liberated. It's far from it, because the Turks haven't left yet. But now they can vote. And this signals the end of the Makedonios Agonas. The end of the Macedonian struggle is when the Syntagma was reinstalled, and there was no more dispute about affiliation. Whom are you with? We're going to vote, and we're going to see whom you're with. So, it's okay. The Macedonian struggle ended in 1908, but then came the Balkan Wars, during which 1912-13, when most of the Balkan countries are liberated one after the other, the Ottomans are retreating, the Ottoman Empire is shrinking, so Florina is liberated, Thessaloniki is liberated this time, and all this is a prelude to the First World War, 1914 to 1918. And even though after the end of the First World War, Greeks and Turks continue fighting, because all the way to 1923 with the Asia Minor catastrophe and the bigger change of population that I mentioned earlier. Then there is a small interlude of peace. There's about 16 years between 23 and 39 with no wars. In fact, that's when the idyllic relationship between Theodosea and Yoga take place. They have some peace. And then start the wars again. And here is the Second World War. And when the Second World War ends in 1944, things don't stop again for the Greeks. So they continue fighting in the Civil War, which lasts another 5 years, because communists who resisted the Germans very bravely during the German occupation, now they wanted power, they wanted a share of the pie. In fact, they wanted to create a little country with capital Florina and have it recognized in the United Nations by the Soviet Union bloc countries. And the national forces from Greece are fighting with them, and that drags on for 5 years. So we see here, the first half of the 20th century is full of wars for Greece, except for a little interlude of 15 years in the middle. It was Polemos who led it. I live in Switzerland, and which is admired by the Greeks for its high standard of living and prosperity, etc., etc. But Switzerland did not participate in any of these wars. In fact, the last war Switzerland has was at the time of Napoleon. So the comparison is not fair. Here is Theodore's Modis at the time where Paraskevi believes that he's too much for this poor refugee teacher who is not worth her brave and smart and rich. It wasn't so much rich now because ever since the house was burned in the monastery, they had to tighten the belt significantly. But he was betrothed to Athena, the beautiful daughter of the mayor of Florina. The mothers of Athena and Paraskevi had all arranged it. However, he fell in love with Theodosia, and Paraskevi cannot stand it. Here is Theodosia at the age of 19, with her sister 15, and she is in fact a poor teacher in Florina. But it's a place where teachers are badly needed, because there is a minority Slavic-speaking people in Florina with territorial aspirations. So education was taken very seriously in Florida. A little town of less than 15,000 people had 6 elementary schools, 2 model schools, they're called trotipa, 2 high schools, and 1 teachers' academy that produced teachers. All this because the Slav Macedonian language spoken, it was spoken on the market on Saturday morning, and they also have aspirations territorially. So the Slavonian language is a Bulgarian dialect with Serbian, Albanian, and Greek elements in it. We used to call it a Makedonitica, and I learned how to count up to 5. My mother, who lived in Florida and taught for 31 years, didn't learn even that much. So when I said, how come you haven't learned this language all these years? She told me that I could lose my job if they heard me speaking it. The educators were a powerful and influential body in Florida. Here is a picture of teachers in Florida. Here is Lucia peeking behind her friend Hellenic. They were colleagues, very young. But the dominant figure in the middle, Gardikas, the director, was an important personality. And when he heard the rumors that Yorgos and Theodore see each other secretly at night, he took action. He relocated Theodore up in remote villages up in the mountains, far from Florida, with a justification lacking moral virtue. Well, that didn't stop Yorgos from going and visiting her wherever she was. This is in Meliti, up in the mountains in 1930, and this is in Clissura in 1934, where he would go with a taxi, pick her up, and drive all the way to Athens by taxi from Clissura, bypassing Thessaloniki. They did this not every weekend, but at least a couple of months a month. Athens was a big cultural center. He was making good money as a lawyer in Florida. He was crazy about Theodosia, so he just spent it. And in Athens, of course, it would be wining, dining, night shows, the good life. They even got engaged. You may ask, why don't get married? Well, because Paraskevi doesn't allow it. And Yorgos is, among other things, superstitious. He had a cousin who got married against her mother's wish, and then shortly afterwards she died. But no, he didn't want to pain his mother so much because she was already lost her husband, lost her house, lost everything, and he didn't want to go against her, that she objected so. So it was dragging on like this. Paraskevi gave her consent to that union much later, under the condition that she will have nothing to do with Theodosia, and only after the intervention of the priest. The priest of Florina, Theodosia was very religious. She would go to, not Theodosia, Paraskevi. She was very religious. She would go to church every Sunday, and when the priest heard that she's been mean to her son and they've been engaged and she doesn't allow their wedding, he refused her communion. That shook her up the way she was. She still resisted, very stubborn lady, until the Germans came, and when they occupied Florina, they wanted to confiscate the house, she, at that point, she invited my mother and the family to the house, but I'll tell you about this later, just to make sure it's full so the Germans don't confiscate it. Here is Yorgos in his first, in his law office. He was a good lawyer. In fact, they say that one can prove anything with statistics. It looks like good lawyers don't even need statistics. The first article that he wrote in 1926, he was barely starting his career, but he was prolific, as I said. He was publishing articles in newspapers everywhere. So he is 24 years old when he writes, and he calls on Vulgaroctonos, Basil the Bulgar slayer. You all know the story of Vulgaroctonos, this emperor, 1200 Byzantine emperor, who defeated the Bulgarians and blinded 99 out of every 100 soldiers, left the 100th with one eye to bring the Bulgarians back to Bulgaria. Now, when I heard the story, I was appalled as a child. I had nightmares. But here he says it wasn't his fault. He says he was a civilized Byzantine emperor, always had displayed unrivaled big-heartedness in all previous wars. But you can imagine how, to what extent, and what destruction caused the Bulgarians to change him, to compel him to behave like this. Now, obviously, Yorgos is anti-Bulgaria. They killed his father, they burned his house, they took over his country. He cannot capitalize. Every time the word Bulgaria, he never capitalizes B. And yet, the same year, 1926, later in the year, he published another article. Here is in Kafarebuzo as he published it. I just want to point out the following. If we allow schools and churches in Bulgaria who have nothing to lose, in fact, he says, we're going to achieve a general entente, a general understanding, Balkan understanding, which is going to be beneficial to everybody. And of course, the Greek government has yet to implement this. There are no Bulgarian churches or schools in Florida, and that's resented very much by the Slavic-speaking population in Florida. But let's go back to the book story. On the book cover it says, among the protagonists, there are two strong women and a charming, indomitable man. Now you know who they are, Theodore, Paraskevi, and Yorgos. But we should add a house, because the house plays an important role. I mentioned it earlier. Well, Yorgos he bought a parcel in the middle of the town, and he wanted a house in Byzantine style in honor of his beloved woman from Constantinople. So when he saw the new building of the the Bank of Greece being built in Florina, and that really features this kind of Byzantine style, he took the same architect. He was a very well-known Greek architect called Aristomenes Valdis. He left many worthwhile buildings around the country, and he told him to build him a Byzantine house for his wife. Aristomenes Valdis was inspired by a world-renowned architect, Le Corbusier. Le Corbusier has built this villa, which is called a Turkish villa, or Villa Schwab in Switzerland. It's a big structure. It has two semicircular rooms on each side. And Le Corbusier saw this when he was traveling in Bosporus. He was observing architecture. So Valdis copied this style, but he cut it down in half because the parcel of Yorgos was smaller. So this is only one semicircular house, one semicircular room. And the rest of the house, this is an older picture, it has been declared a landmark in Florida now, and yet they still took out this nice awning above the tiles, and they added shutters which are green, it doesn't go at all. Anyway, that's where Yorgos, he built it for Theodore, and the two of them never lived in it, because Paraskevi wouldn't allow it. Paraskevi lived in it alone, all by herself. And even later, when Yorgos got married, he would spend some nights sleeping in the house of his mother, and some nights sleeping with his wife in another house. And that dragged on for a while until the Germans came. The Germans imprisoned Yorgos, and they threatened to confiscate the house, so Paraskevi brought the Theodore and the children in, but no avail. The Germans took up the big semicircular room anyway. The World War II began with the Italians invading Greece and losing, because the Greeks won and pushed the Italians back into Albania, deep into Albania, and that's when Theodosia's two brothers fought in that war. That's when Churchill came on the radio and said how the famous, that you may have heard, Greeks fight, it's not Greeks that fight like heroes, it's heroes that fight like Greeks. In fact, I found it in the internet, and we can hear it here, loud, his voice, Churchill's voice saying it. The picture doesn't follow the words because it was only a recording. They found the original tape in BBC. but they put a little video on it. Unfortunately, we lose the first 3 words, so you're gonna miss our allies, the Greeks, but you can pick that from there. Okay, let's listen to it.
And Seymour, the Italian army, hence we will not say that Greeks fight like Iran, but we will say that Iran fight like Greeks.
It's amazing. It's amazing what one finds on the internet. It's very rich information. In fact, a little later, I found this picture on the internet. This is Florina, and this is a German SS officer posing with Florina in the background to send to his friend, girlfriend, mother, or whatever, back in Germany. But if you look more carefully at what she said, you see, here's the Modis house with a semicircular room. And you can discern a little black figure with white hair. Paraskevi always wore black until the day she died. When her husband was killed, she put on black, she never took it off. And here she happened to be on the balcony at the moment this German was taking his picture. I just fell on it by mistake and I couldn't believe it. The Second World War ended, and Thessaloniki is liberated now in 1944. And here we see, this figure here is Yorgos Modis, but not my father, my uncle, who was also Yorgos Modis. He was the son of Christos, my father was the son of Theodore. And he was a Matrianon Makros as well. He was older than my father. He fought, he was wounded on the Macedonian struggle. Later he became a politician, he became a minister. But here, 1944, he's given the job by Yorgos Papandreou, the grandfather of the recent prime minister, to come to Thessaloniki and take over as a general governor from the Allies. Here are the Allies driving him on Leophora Nikis in the seaside of Thessaloniki. Lots of people applauding, everybody is rejoicing because the Germans are gone, and here is our new governor, Greek, and everything is going to be fine, happiness from now on. Well, Greeks are very enthusiastic, always expect the happiness to come, and it drags on. Happiness drags his feet because he took over Thessaloniki, but it was mostly in words. Thessaloniki at the time was dominated by communists. As I said, the communists who fought hard, they wouldn't give up power. And so the Second World War finished, but the war continued in Greece, now between communists and loyal and national forces. As Aristotle said, it's not enough to win a war, it's more important to organize the peace afterwards. And that was really hard in Greece, particularly in Macedonia, West Macedonia, where this war keeps taking place. The civil war continued for a while. These are 2 Slavic origin guns which were bombing Florina from the nearby mountains, and they were eventually captured, and now they're displayed in the central square of Florina, which is called Modis Square, Yorgos Modis Square. And here the next day, the civil war ends in 12th of February 1949 with the big win of the national forces against the communists. And here the next day's papers will announce Megali Nikis di Florina, and that signals the end of the civil war. Of course, all this may have been in vain, because the future of the Balkans and the future of Greece and everything was played on a much higher level by leaders like Churchill and Stalin in Malta. Here is the percentage agreement between Churchill and Stalin. They were having dinner in Malta. It's called also Hartopetseta because it's written on a scrap piece of paper. They were having dinner in Malta, and Churchill spelled out percentages of spheres of influence. each Balkan country what sphere of influence would belong to. He wrote this, he passed it on to Stalin, and Stalin put this check mark. He agreed. So it was sealed there that Greece is going to be 9% under the influence of UK and USA, and 10% only under the influence of Soviet Union. Yugoslavia would be 50-50, and the others and so on. Some of them drifted a little bit later on. But just to say that people are keeping their lives up on the ground while decisions are taken elsewhere. I'm going to stop here. There's many more stories in the book, fascinating about personal accounts, about relationships, about events, historical events, and so on. So I will just close with one of Yorgo's hobbies. He was a photographer. It was a rather luxurious hobby at the time. He had this camera here, I remember it, because I was playing with it later. And he took lots of pictures, and he participated in a photographic contest. And he won the first prize. The first prize was this brownie box camera. And the picture with which he won it, well, guess what? Was a picture of Theodore contre jour by the sea. And this picture ended up finishing on the cover of the book. There's many more pictures. On page 402 of the book, I give a web address and a password that the reader can go and find the 150, 160 pictures that relate to the story of the book. In fact, every picture has on top the page on which it is mentioned. So there's much more material, visual material. But other than that, I thank you for the occasion to present my book.